You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas. Every Monday through Friday during the Razorbacks football training camp, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones and Scotty Bordelon.
Razorbacks went through another morning practice Friday. They will scrimmage Saturday inside Razorback Stadium. It'll be the final scrimmage of the preseason. We're just 15 days away now from Arkansas season opener against Cincinnati on September the 3rd. Matt Jones with Andrew Joseph of WholeHogSports.com and the Hall of Famer, Bob Holt of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Bob was recently inducted into the Arkansas Sports Writers and Sportscasters Hall of Fame. So congratulations to Bob on that. It was a great induction ceremony watching him and listening to some of his stories from his 40-plus years covering the Razorbacks. Bob, let's start with you. You were at practice this morning. What were your takeaways watching the latest open media session?
Well, yeah, we were just talking. I think one of the plays that really stood out, and I've missed a couple of the open periods, but I've watched a fair amount of practice. And Quincy McAdoo, a freshman receiver from Clarendon, he had a great catch on the sideline. I think the pass was from Malik Hornsby. I think it was. And just, tight coverage by, Kyrie Johnson, just a, diving catch. That was a big time play. It's about as good a catch as I can remember seeing. I tell you, Jane Hazelwood had a really good catch the other day too, but to see a true freshman make a play like that, I thought was really impressive. Got to see, Hudson Henry was running with the threes, but he didn't practice or, in the early part of practice, and I didn't know this, I guess he has asthma. And he didn't get through the very first practice. I'm talking like 2 weeks ago, but he was out there. He got a nice catch over the middle from it was Cade Fortin, who's running number 3 quarterback, transfer from South Florida. It was good to see Hudson get in there and get involved. They did a lot of, I don't know if these were planned or if the protection broke down. There's quite a bit of scramble plays from KJ Jefferson and Malik Hornsby, but the part we were able to see, that catch by McAdoo really stood out to me.
That's 2 days in a row, right? That McAdoo's had a big catch, Andrew. He had one over the top of Hudson Clark wearing the boxing gloves the day before.
Yeah, and I was on the opposite sideline when he made that catch, and everyone kind of was in awe. And it was one of those catches where I couldn't tell if he got his feet in or not, but it really didn't matter because it was just such an acrobatic and athletic snag that it didn't matter if his feet were in bounds or not. No one could believe he caught it to begin with.
It just kind of goes to what they've been talking about throughout the camp, that these freshman receivers, Bob, are really impressing. I mean, Isaiah Satania, from all indications, has had a really good camp. You've seen McAdoo the last couple of days, Sam Mbake. You hear Sam Pittman talk about this freshman receiver class. It basically, he says we hit on all 3 of these receivers. All 3 of them are going to be really good receivers in time. We'll see if it's this year or another year down the road. There's certainly some competition in front of them, but it feels like if they can keep this trio of receivers together, for 2 or 3 years, it could be a group that really has a big production cumulatively over the course of their career.
Yeah, Satane, of course, he's a local kid from Fayetteville High. And, the fact that, he stayed at high school, it's almost like if kids stay in high school for their spring semester, it's almost like basketball players pull out the NBA draft or something. But so many guys do early enrollees. But, of course, Isaiah is a big track guy. So he wanted to be in high school for his track season. Had a great track season, set some state records, helped Fayetteville win a state title. So he didn't go through spring ball. He really got back into football mode in the summer with their workouts and obviously in fall camp. But, first time he practiced with Arkansas was, I guess, August 5th or whatever day started. So I think they've gone through 13 practices now. And, he's a guy that whenever you talk to somebody on offense or even the DBs, that he's a name that stands out. He's got that track speed. And, he's not super big. I think he's like 5'11", 175, not super big, certainly by SEC standards, but he's so athletic and so fast. I definitely could see him making some plays on offense, and that definitely be a factor in the return game. I think he could be a really good return guy for him. I know he did that at Fayetteville, but I think they're very happy with how he's progressed, considering this is his first time to practice with them. And yeah, it just adds depth to that receiver room. That was a big question mark, I think, coming into the season after they'd lost, Traylon Burks, obviously a first round draft pick. And, they didn't have him in the bowl game. And you saw the passing game, was not super productive. But, the running game was very productive. KJ Jefferson in particular, they basically ran the ball down Penn State's throat in the second half to win that game. But now you feel like, Jaden Hazelwood has had a really good camp, really seems much more comfortable than he did in the spring, taking a vocal leadership role. Matt Landers, a transfer from Toledo via Georgia, where he began his college career. That's how he and Sam Pittman knew each other. You think, well, guy coming from Toledo, that's Mac, and that's, good football, but it's not the SEC. But Landers is really a guy everybody talks about, this top end speed. And if you look at his stats from Toledo, I think he had 20 catches, but he averaged nearly 28 yards a catch. So obviously big play ability there. And I think Kendall Briles said today, Warren Thompson was about as impressive the improvement he's made from last year to this year is really eye catching. And his teammates have talked about that too. So, and KJ Jefferson, their starting quarterback, was asked about the receivers, but he's seen and he said, hey, they heard the criticism and they've, met it head on. And so what looked to possibly be a weak spot or a question mark, of course, they haven't played any games yet, but through 2 weeks of camp, certainly receiver has probably been the big story of camp, just how good those guys are and how deep that room is.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm actually putting together something right now, like who are the buzziest players of the preseason camp for Arkansas. It feels like half of my list is receivers, whether it be Landers or Hazelwood or, obviously Satania would fit into that. Bob, you wrote a story about Isaiah somewhere right around the start of camp, and he told you that his goal is to play in the NFL and run in the Olympics. That's a pretty lofty goal, but when you kind of start to think about it, I don't know that it's really that far-fetched. I mean, in high school, he you didn't set a record, but he had the national lead last season for most receiving yards by any receiver in high school football. And then you look at his track times, they're up there as, in the events that he runs, he's one of the top in his class. So I don't know that it's really that far-fetched to see him do it. It certainly takes a certain kind of work ethic and, level of commitment that maybe you don't see from very many athletes to do this, but I don't know that it's so far-fetched when you hear him talk about it. He certainly has a plan for it.
Well, yeah, it's good to have high goals and set the bar high, especially when you're a great athlete. If he set modest goals, he'd probably achieve them pretty easily. So it depends on how old you are. You can remember, well, you have to be really old to remember Bullet Bob Hayes, but he was a track guy. He was the 1960 Olympic champion, the 100 meters in Tokyo. And of course, the last Olympics were in Tokyo too. But the Cowboys, Gil Brandt, their scouting, I'm not sure what his title was. He was essentially their scouting director. And this was at a time when scouting was not that sophisticated. And he was really ahead of the curve. He did a good job. From what I've understood is that he made good friends with like the football office secretaries. He'd send them stuff. And so when he called, he'd get the lowdown on different players. I mean, everybody might know about, Paul Horning or Jim Brown, but, Bob Hayes was not a household name in football, but he had top end speed, and the Cowboys, signed him. And he's really the guy, I think this is right, that, everybody played man-to-man defense. When Bob Hayes came into the NFL, that's when zone defenses were created because nobody could cover that guy man-to-man. And so, if Willie Gault back in the 80s was a great Olympic sprinter from Tennessee, the Vols, and he was I think a first-round draft pick by the Bears, played on their Super Bowl team. As a Packers fan, kind of pains me to even bring that up, but and of course, if you fans of Arkansas history, Clyde Smackover Scott was the silver medalist in the 110-meter hurdles at the 48 London Olympics, the first Olympics that were held after World War II. They didn't have Olympics in 1940 or 44 because of the war. So those were the first Olympics since the Berlin Olympics in 36. And then Clyde Scott, of course, was a great player at Arkansas, Southwest Conference running back, defensive back, and he played in the NFL. So I think if Isaiah were to attain that lofty goal, he would be the second guy, along with Clyde Scott, to be an Olympian and play in the NFL. but Arkansas has had a lot of good dual sport guys. Richard Smith, I saw him practice the other day. He was a great jumper, horizontal jumper, and a really great receiver. You think about some throwers they had, like Marty Kobza, who's a defensive lineman and a great shot put thrower. So it can be done. And I thought Chris Bucknam, Arkansas's men's track coach, had a good line about this, is that if you're talking about two sports, football and track are kind of brothers, right? Because, Isaiah, in that story we talked about, he talked about how when he's down in his stance and as a receiver, he envisions being the starting blocks of a race and just, powering out of that stance. And when he's, hopefully breaking into the open, he's thinking about, somebody trying to catch him in 100 meters or something. So I really think, I don't know if all the football coaches feel this way. I think Sam Pittman realized if they were going to sign him, track had to be on the table. That was just part of the deal. If you look at the other schools that he had committed to originally, Texas A&M and Oregon, great football schools, also great track schools. And so just like Arkansas. And so I think track's going to be, that was part of the package with Isaiah. And I think one of the reasons he's so darn fast is because of track. I mean, he'd be fast anyway, but he's even faster because of track. And I also think it kind of helps guys mentally maybe to go to different sports. Maybe it's not like the old days where, Jackie Robinson was playing baseball and track and football and whatever at UCLA back in the 40s. But, I think there is still a place for a two-sport athlete in modern college athletics. And I think, Isaiah is a perfect example of a guy that could pull that off.
Yeah, something that intrigues me when we talk about this wide receiver room is the fact that you're maybe potential top three and Matt Landers, Jaden Hazelwood, and Warren Thompson are all three transfers who didn't really live up to their expectations at their former schools. And I think there's maybe some value in that and some lessons to be learned from the three freshmen that the Razorbacks have from those guys.
It's a good point. Kendall Briles, the Arkansas offensive coordinator, spoke with the media today. Typically two times that we get to speak to the coordinators each year. You'll speak to them once in spring football, once in the preseason. And here's some highlights of what Briles had to say.
Last year, like I said, we didn't know what we had, from really a quarterback position. And, you go through all these practices and you get in there with a lot of people in the stands. It's just different, and it's just different. So to get out there and try to execute early without penalties, and especially playing a tempo offense where we're not huddling, everybody is always real calm about what's going on. So it can be challenging at times, but boy, it helps having a guy who's done it and played the position, done it at a high level. So having KJ back really helps. It all matters with the passing game, how we're running the football, how we're protecting them. There's so many variables, how they're playing us. If they're playing us off, we're going to run the football. I mean, so there's just so many variables that, you can look at it and say, well, heck, he only threw for 150 yards. Bottom line is he is a winner. We know he's a winner. And when you're a quarterback, to be a great quarterback, you have to win football games. And I believe in him. I wouldn't trade him for anybody in America when it comes to winning football games. And however we got to do it, we got to do it.
That was Arkansas offensive coordinator Kendall Briles. Bob, what were some of the things that Briles had to say today that stood out to you?
Well, he got asked some about, what kind of production he expects. Like, could they have, could they average more yards than they did last season? And things of that nature. What about KJ Jefferson's, could he lead him in rushing again? And he said, basically stats, he's not in it for stats, he's in it to win, and basically whatever they have to do to win, that's what he wants them to do. So depending on who they're playing, how that defense is the scheme of that defense, maybe they have to run more, or maybe they have to pass more. Maybe they're looking to run more clock if they have a lead late. Maybe they got to hit some quick strikes to get back in a ball game. But he basically talked about the receiver room, how impressive those guys have been. Talked about, Trey Knox and how he could really be a big weapon at tight end as a converted wide receiver who's added on some good weight to be more of a blocker. I think he feels good about their running backs rotation, feels good about, the experience on the offensive line. Tom wrote a story about this the other day. And I hadn't thought about it quite like this, but I think Tom added up 100 career starts for those linemen. So that's obviously a very experienced offensive line. So, and it's funny, we talked about percentage, And he didn't give out raw numbers, but he basically said, percentage wise, because they chart every play. In terms of completion percentage, it was KJ and then Fortin, and then Malik Hornsby was third. Although from the little bit of practice, I've seen, Hornsby's arm looks a lot stronger and more accurate. And I think, Kendall, basically confirmed that. But yeah, I think they're feeling pretty good about the offensive production in camp so far.
He was really complimentary of Rocket Sanders as well. And I think his exact words were, or maybe not exact words, but he mentioned that he's probably the best pro in the program as far as his conduct on and off the field. And he even said that if there's anyone he's going to let babysit his kids, it'd be Rocket Sanders. So it just seems that Rocket's been having about as good as off season as you can have in all facets of the game.
The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas, where you always get the best service and best buying experience in the state.
For all your automotive needs, shop Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers, where we guarantee you the best buying experience and best service after the sale in Arkansas. Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
If you're in the Fayetteville area, make sure on August 24th to come hear Sam Pittman speak at the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. That'll be held at the Hilton Garden Inn off of Weddington Drive in Fayetteville. Also on September the 7th, Hunter Yurachek is going to come speak to our luncheon. Those luncheons begin at noon. Doors open at 11:45. We'll get you in and out. In about an hour, you'll get a chance to listen to the Razorbacks head coach and athletic director give their thoughts on the current state of affairs and also do a little bit of Q&A. You can go to nwadealpiggy.com. That's nwadealpiggy.com. It's one of our sister websites for ticket information. Each day on the Whole Hog Football Preseason Podcast, we talk about a different position, take a little bit deeper look. And today the position is quarterback. And I think it probably says something about how good Arkansas feels about itself that it's taken us 10 days to get into quarterback talk. But Bob, this is a different kind of camp. It's the first time in 5 years that they've had a returning starter coming back at quarterback. The last one was Austin Allen in 2017. And, with KJ Jefferson, I think that he showed everybody so much last season, whether it be with the completion percentage, whether it be with his play late in some games, keeping them in games or bringing them back to win games. Obviously the rushing component was there. There's just not that angst about quarterback that it feels like there has been for so many of the past preseason camps at Arkansas.
Yeah, last year there was a lot of uncertainty. KJ had started against Missouri in a real wild game in 2020, and it had led a late drive that looked like, it was going to put Arkansas over the top, and then Missouri had a drive of its own and hit a game-winning field goal, but I think that game was 50-48. And so, and KJ put up real good numbers, passed accurately, ran the ball effectively, but, he was playing Missouri, not Alabama, and so you thought, yeah, that was a nice game, but can he do it for a season, and can he do it against the top teams in the SEC? And if you look back, and of course that first half against Rice didn't really do anything to dispel the concerns. I mean, he struggled with some passing, and it seemed like when he hit guys, they dropped it. And, it's hard to believe with the kind of season Arkansas put together that I guess they were down. Were they not down 17-7 in the third quarter, early in the third quarter of that Rice game? I think that's right.
I think that is right.
I think they were down 10-7 at halftime, and you're going like, oh my God, they're going to lose to freaking Rice or something. Or they're struggling to beat Rice, and they came back and had a really impressive, really probably about the last quarter and a half, and they won the game 38-17, and KJ had some big runs, and Burks made some. Actually, Burks didn't play that well because he'd been hurt, but they basically, if you saw the final score but didn't see the game, you think, okay, well, big whoop, they beat Rice by 21. That's about what they were expected to do. But the way they beat them was kind of weird, and I think people weren't sure what to feel about KJ coming out of that game. They were happy that he'd rallied the offense in the second half, but that first half was kind of hard to forget if you're an Arkansas fan. Then he really just took off from there. And of course, they beat Texas, drilled them and just ran the ball down Texas' throat. And KJ was so effective in that game. And even then, Burks was still kind of coming back. It was really that game against Georgia Southern when Burks really took off and had some big plays. But yeah, KJ, you feel like now he's one of the best players in the country. I think I don't have the quote right in front of me. Basically, Kendall Briles said there's no other quarterback he'd want leading this offense. And so, it just seems like the right fit for what they want to do, a true dual threat guy, let him in rushing. But I think what a lot of people tend to forget is and of course, Traylon Burks had a lot to do with this, and he's in the NFL now, but KJ had 21 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. I mean, a 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. I mean, who wouldn't take that? And he had some really big plays. And of course, the Ole Miss game that they ended up losing, I guess 52-51, he was so impressive in that game, really went toe-to-toe with Matt Corral that everybody was pushing for the Heisman. And then as good a year as KJ had, you see a lot of these lists. It's kind of that time of the year, preseason, where people put out a lot of lists, best this, best that. And I see a lot of top quarterbacks in the SEC. They go 4 or 5 deep, and KJ Jefferson's on that list, which befuddles me. I mean, Bryce Young clearly is the number one guy. He's the Heisman Trophy winner, and he had like 47 touchdown passes or something crazy last year. But after that, I would argue you could put KJ Jefferson number 2. You don't have to. There are obviously other good quarterbacks. But I think that's something that you think, wow, KJ had a great year. Could he come in a little overconfident, a little complacent? Well, no, I don't think so, because I think he still has a chip on his shoulder. And I'm not just, that's something that a lot of kids say and a lot of teams say, we got a chip on our shoulder. And well, no, you're ranked and, this and that. You're getting a lot of respect. But I do feel like a lot of the national folks or SEC folks who are ever putting these lists together are kind of undervaluing KJ Jefferson when you consider that Arkansas led the country, the Power 5 teams in rushing, and he led the Razorbacks in rushing, and so durable. I mean, he started every game. There was the A&M game where he had to come out for a couple of series and get, I guess, some painkiller rubbed into his knee to sort of get that. And but I mean, the guy was so durable, made so many plays. I just don't know how you don't feel like he's one of the top, 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the SEC. But I think that helps. Gives him a little bit of extra motivation. That's something they can use. I think Sam Pittman said he kind of liked that. Hey, that's great. Just keep underestimating the Razorbacks. But yeah, clearly KJ Jefferson, I mean, he's understandably very confident. I think the team's very confident in him, and it's really a totally different situation than it was last year when I think everybody knew he was talented, but he was just such an unknown quantity at that time.
You mentioned the interceptions. I think one of those 4 interceptions was on a Hail Mary at the end of the half. I mean, you take that one away and you're looking at a 7-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which is even better than what he ended up with last season. They don't ask him to do a whole lot, but I do think there's something to be said, Andrew. And when I say they don't ask him to do a whole lot, yeah, there are some shots down the field, but what this Kendall Briles offense is, it's a very short intermediate passing game a lot of times, and asking the receivers to make his man miss, and you get a lot of yards after the catch. You think about Traylon Burks' long touchdown catch last year. I think what he had like a 91-yarder, and probably 90 of it was after the catch. What Jefferson doesn't do is he doesn't make mistakes. I mean, plain and simple, he doesn't put the ball on the ground. He doesn't fumble it, really. Doesn't throw a lot of interceptions, and there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he even mentioned today that one of his main focuses coming into this season was taking better care of the ball. And it's like, that wasn't really much of an issue for him last year. And so it's almost like kind of a perfectionist mindset, which I guess is not a bad thing when you're a quarterback, and something that Arkansas probably wants him to have. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the supporting cast that he has this year compared to last year. I know losing Traylon Burks is obviously a blow to that passing offense, but I think when you look at their number 2 options last year were Tyson Morris and I guess Warren Thompson maybe, but Davion Warren, those two in particular, I think probably would not be in the top 3, would probably be the wide receiver 4 or 5 in this wide receiver depth chart. And so I think he has maybe more exciting weapons for him that if he gets the ball out quickly, they can make a lot more things happen, and his stats might look better just as a result of his supporting cast improving.
It reminds me a little bit, Bob, of you're an NFL owner. You own a share of the Green Bay Packers, right? But it reminds me a little bit of Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you think about all these receivers that have come through Green Bay. These aren't really these great receivers, but when they play with Aaron Rodgers, they are great receivers. They have these great numbers. Devontae Adams might be an exception to that rule, but for the most part, it's been a cast of players around him who, I mean, they're not really Pro Football Hall of Famers. They're guys who, they might have 1 All-Pro season or 2 All-Pro seasons. And where I'm going with this is that, with Jefferson, you hear the coaches talk about here recently, he just puts the ball on target. He doesn't really have to make the receivers do a whole lot. And I think that maybe that's why we're seeing so much talk about the receivers. Yes, I think they've gotten better from the spring, but I think that having a really good quarterback, a really accurate quarterback around them can certainly make them look a lot better.
Yeah, I remember it was funny. I asked Kendall Briles about this today. I'd have to look back at the quote, but it was a year ago. I think Tom asked him about completion percentage for KJ, because Felipe Franks, the transfer from Florida that started for Arkansas in 2020, he had an incredible. I think he might have broken Kevin Scanlon's percentage record that had stood since '79, and high 60-some%, 67, 68, whatever it was. And you're thinking, well, no offense to KJ, he's not going to come close to that. And a lot of other guys won't either, or wouldn't if they were starting for the Razorbacks. And Kendall said something like, well, I expect like 65% or something like that. I remember thinking, man, that just isn't realistic. That's just asking too much of a first-year starter. And, but, KJ had a higher completion percentage. It was 67 something, I think, and it almost broke Felipe's record. And so then you think, well, yeah, like we've been talking about, Traylon Burks is gone, but sometimes, and we'll see what happens this season. It's a really, really challenging schedule, but maybe having 3 or 4 or more really good receivers, maybe they're able to compensate for the loss of one, arguably the greatest receiver Arkansas has ever had. I mean, you can talk about Lance Allworth, who wasn't really a true wideout, I don't think here. He was sort of a hybrid running back, wide receiver, and he's an NFL Hall of Famer. So if somebody said Lance Allworth was the greatest they ever produced, I wouldn't argue with that. But in terms of just true receiving skills, Burks might be the best, at the college level. Of course, the game's changed a whole lot since 1960 or 59, whenever Allworth's senior year was. But yeah, I think, KJ's numbers could be better with this group of receivers. And I think, he worked hard with them, and, a lot of hard work in the summer with these guys. And I think that's shown up now in camp, and that'll transfer into the season too. But I think, they're good for each other. I mean, I think he makes them better, and they probably make him better and I think when you have a good quarterback you have confidence in, you just maybe make some plays you normally wouldn't. You kind of raise your level of play because of that guy. And that's the definition of a great leader and athlete, is the guy who makes everybody around him better, whether we're talking about a basketball player, a football player, baseball player, whatever. He elevates the play of everybody.
I hope that makes sense. I'm not comparing KJ Jefferson to Aaron Rodgers from an athletic standpoint. I'm just saying that to Bob's point, I think he does make the receivers around him better. And, we talked about the receivers earlier and how that's really been the story of camp. And if you would have asked this coaching staff, I think coming out of spring practice, who's your best receiver? Some of them might have said that from a ceiling perspective, they thought that Malik Hornsby was going to have a great season for them as a receiver. And I think what's happened here during camp is that now, I think Hornsby will still play some at that position, Bob, but I don't know that it's going to be nearly at the amount that you would have thought he was going to 3-4 months ago. And maybe that's made it to where he gets more reps at quarterback than they thought he was going to going into camp. I haven't heard a coach say that necessarily per se, but from what I've seen from Hornsby as a quarterback we'll see how he runs the offense. There's a lot of things that go into playing that position more so than just the mechanics that you see on the field. But just from a mechanics standpoint, it looks like the passes are more accurate. It looks like he's a lot more comfortable leading the offense than we've seen at any of the other points in his career.
Yeah, like I say, it's limited reps we've seen, but I've been impressed by the arm strength, throwing some deep balls, and on target, the accuracy. And I remember after the first practice, I believe was Sam Pittman said that Hornsby had gotten probably 15 to 20 reps with the receivers. That he was still in the quarterback room, and that was his primary position because obviously, KJ Jefferson or any starter is one play away from something happening, getting hurt, and then you got to go to your backup. So you better have a good backup quarterback. Well, that's getting harder and harder to do with the transfer portal because guys just don't want to play behind anybody. And of course, we know Malik Hornsby considered transferring and then was kind of talked out of it, decided to come back. But I did ask Kendall Briles today, the part I've seen, we don't see Hornsby with the receivers. And so you don't know, well, is he not, maybe he's not, and the other receivers will tell you, he's in the quarterback meeting room, not their meeting room. But Kendall said Malik's still getting some work with the receivers. But yeah, I'm like, I wonder with how deep this group is, does he get much playing time? But one nice thing is, the travel squads, you can only take so many guys, I guess 70 something guys on road trips. And so if you have, now you don't want to, have Malik, take a big hit as a receiver, but that's basically, it's like having a utility infielder that can play second, short, and third or something. You take Malik Hornsby and you've got somebody that could be in your receiver rotation and your backup quarterback. And I have to wonder if there won't be maybe a nice package of things they can put in for Malik Hornsby. I mean, KJ Jefferson's the lead quarterback, and you don't want to necessarily have him out of a tight game. And they're probably going to play a lot of tight games because that schedule is so challenging. But, I would think they'd have some kind of package ready for Hornsby to where he could, either running or, maybe he does a throwback, to somebody, a running back they trust that throwing the ball. And that was the one good thing we know Burks didn't do very well was throw the ball. That didn't have a lot of success when they tried those trick plays with him. But yeah, Hornsby's still getting some work at receiver, but you don't feel like, wow, they really need him at receiver. It's more about, well, he's a really good athlete. Like to get him on the field in some different ways, and let's see what he can do. But my guess is they're probably gonna have some special packages for him to be able to get some playing time because you want to get him some good reps, in some games early, just so in case he has to play quarterback like he had to for 3 series at A&M against A&M last year. And he did a solid job. I think he led him to a field goal, but you could also see, man, this guy, he's a huge threat running the ball, not much passing the ball. I think if he, was forced to play, if KJ had to come out of a game, that Hornsby, the passing aspect of that would be a lot better. You wouldn't feel like Kendall Briles would be hamstrung in what he could call. That they would have the full playbook at their disposal, or at least a good portion of it.
I think the thing that makes Malik Hornsby so unique is that his speed gives him the opportunity to be a successful player without being an elite passer. Like he just has to pass at maybe an average level to become such a dangerous player, because I think the problem with him last year was that when he came in, that it was just an automatic. The defense knew he was going to run the ball and he just had no shot at throwing the ball. But if he could maybe put just the slightest bit of fear into defenses that he can throw the ball, the second he takes off and runs with it, I mean, he's, I don't know, maybe Braxton Miller-esque from Ohio State before he ultimately transferred to wide receiver.
Yeah, I think with Hornsby, the offense is not going to take as big of a drop off this season if he comes into the game than it did last year, I think. But to Bob's point earlier about the wide receiver passes, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but I think that since Briles has been hired, Arkansas has completed 1 of 10 wide receiver passes, and I think Burks was 0 for 6 on his attempts. So that might be an element of the Briles playbook that could be thrown out, unless I guess if you got Hornsby playing receiver, you've got a better chance at completing those passes, Bob.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of interceptions mixed in with those two. But like I said, that was one. I mean, Traylon Burks can do a lot of things, passing the ball. But that was not one of his strengths. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you got Hornsby in there playing receiver, and then that really opens up the playbook to different things. And especially if he could, hit some passes early in the season, then as the season goes on, whatever happens, that's something other teams have to prepare for. That they have to spend part of their practice week. Well, here's what we need to be on the lookout for this, this or that from Malik Hornsby, whether he comes in the game at Arkansas's choosing or he comes to the game because KJ Jefferson has to come out, gets injured or something. And so, yeah, I mean, there were times when we'd say you just don't need to have those receivers throw that pass. I'm sure, or I don't know, but I mean, I would assume that they would just feel like, well, the law of averages at some point, Traylon's going to complete one of these or it's going to be a big play. And I guess it was against A&M. Was it Warren Thompson that threw the pass?
It was Warren Thompson to Tyson Morris. Yeah, that was the only one that had been completed.
Okay. I can't remember. I couldn't remember who it was to, but I remember going down the sideline and being a pretty big play and kind of thinking, well, finally they hit one of those, but yeah, 10% is not a real good percentage of, plays to hit, whether, whatever the call might be. And so, but yeah, maybe that's something that, and I don't know, I couldn't tell you what kind of passer Hazelwood or Landers are. I'm sure that's something they figure out during camp and put, work on that stuff. I mean, we saw Reed Bauer kind of threw that pass behind Blake Kern, but man, it was a touchdown against Alabama. I remember watching that game, and you saw the look on Sam Pittman's face. Of course, he's very happy. And then you see the look on Nick Saban's face, which is like, what the hell just happened? And it's all of a sudden it's a 7-point game, and ultimately Alabama held on and won. But you got to like, Sam Pittman's got some ice in his veins because he's ultimately the guy. I mean, they can work on that all they want in practice, but that doesn't happen in games if Sam Pittman doesn't have the guts to call him. He's got the final say on that, obviously, and they sort of pick their spots. But there may be some times Arkansas needs some plays like that to win the game. The fake run on a fake field goal, or not the fake run, the real run on a fake field goal attempt against LSU by Reed Bauer set up a much shorter field goal attempt by Cam Little in regulation, and Arkansas ultimately won that game in overtime. So, and they had a shot to beat Alabama because of that trick play that fooled Alabama with a touchdown pass. So when you play the teams Arkansas does, sometimes you may have plays like that to have to win a game, or at least give yourself a shot to win a game like that.
I don't know that we've seen enough of Cade Fortin to really have an opinion on him, and the chances of you seeing a third string quarterback are pretty rare, or they're pretty slim, but it does happen. I remember Bob, what was it, 2000 at South Carolina, where they had 3 quarterbacks injured in the same game, and they had to go get somebody off the intramural field to play for them a week or so later.
Yeah, it was, they were playing Ole Miss, and literally it was a guy who I think had been a walk-on.
John Rutledge.
Yeah. I think I got this right. He'd been a walk-on, and then he'd given up football, and he was literally, I don't know if he was playing flag football or he was just in the frat, but they literally got him. I mean, Lane Kiffin kind of had this joke the other day about getting a punter from a fraternity, that was sort of tongue-in-cheek. There was a transfer from Nevada. They had a new punter, which goes to show the portal guys are still transferring, like during freaking training camp. Yeah. You got players transferring in and out. I think they need to kind of put a stop to that. Maybe not. Maybe they should have true freedom in that. But yeah, they had to get John Rutledge, I think, to play against Ole Miss. Yeah, I remember that. That's back when the locker room was open, and I remember going in there and talking to the quarterbacks. I'm trying to remember who all it was.
You had Robbie Hampton on that team.
Yeah, it was
Zach Clark.
Zach Clark,
Jared McBride.
Okay, and yeah, and I think Zach got hurt. I think Zach got hurt, and then it wasn't like a broken leg, and he basically had to come in and finish the game. Or maybe it was Robbie Hampton. I'd have to look it up, but I remember talking to those. Going to the locker room, it was like a freaking hospital. I mean, they were all beat up and all bandaged up, and so it can happen. And obviously, if it happens at quarterback, I mean, South Carolina last year, of course, now they have Spencer Rattler, the one-time Oklahoma Heisman Trophy favorite, but still, and of course, he lost his starting job to Williams, who's now out at USC with Lincoln Riley. But and now Arkansas is probably going to have to face Spencer Rattler in I guess is it week 2 when South Carolina comes in. Yeah. And so but South Carolina, their quarterback situation was so bad. They had a guy who was a former player who was like an analyst for him, but he still had eligibility left. His name fails me, but he ended up starting a game for him.
Multiple games.
Yeah, they basically pulled an analyst out of the press box or off from the sideline and gave him a uniform, So it can happen. You obviously don't want to see that happen. Nobody wants to see those kind of injuries, but it just speaks to the fact that you got to have, more than 1 or 2 quarterbacks ready. Cause if you don't have a quarterback, it's pretty hard for anything else to function. You have the greatest receivers in the world, and if you can't get the ball to them, it doesn't do you much good. And then no matter how good your running backs are, and Arkansas's got good running backs, if they know you can't pass the ball, it's going to be hard to run it. So they have to have some quarterbacks ready. But I think the fact that Briles mentioned that he's got, the second highest passing percentage on the team in camp, that's a good sign. And the times we've seen him, I thought he's looked okay. He's got a little bit of mobility. He's not KJ Jefferson or Malik Hornsby, but he's not, the Statue of Liberty or something back there either. And so, and he's got a little bit of mobility. Looks like he has a pretty decent arm, and I thought he was a nice pickup for him, especially after Cade Renfro hurt his knee, I guess, in the bowl practices last year, and he's a guy who transferred from Ole Miss. Speaking of Ole Miss, so but yeah, it can happen. You hate to see it, and it's rare, but it certainly can happen.
I guess with Hornsby playing receiver, maybe there's more of a chance you could see that third string quarterback too, just because it increases the likelihood of a possible injury to him. Certainly the Razorbacks don't hope that doesn't happen, but it's an interesting year at quarterback for Arkansas because they did not sign a scholarship quarterback in December or February in this last signing class. First time I can remember that ever happening. It's almost like it's a given that you have a quarterback in your signing class. And so that's certainly something worth watching as it pertains to the quarterback room this year. We appreciate you joining us on the Whole Hog Football Podcast. We'll be back next week with more daily podcasts. Next week, we're going to take a look at the Razorbacks' first 4 opponents during the season. We'll also have Sam Pittman's thoughts from the scrimmage and everything else that happens during the final week of preseason camp. They wrap it up, I believe, next Thursday. They don't practice on Friday, and then they kind of go into their normal weekly schedule that they'll have for the rest of the regular season. Like we said, they're about halfway between the start of the preseason and the start of the regular season. That September 3rd game against Cincinnati. Go to wholehogsports.com this weekend. We'll have all the coverage from what Sam Pittman has to say after Saturday's scrimmage. For Bob Holt and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next week on the Whole Hog Football Podcast. Have a great weekend, everyone.
The proceeding has been a production of wholehogsports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at wholehogsports.com for the latest news and commentary.